Welcome to The Explainer. We're diving into a pretty wild story today, one about how the UK's political elite championed a man they saw as a hero, only to watch him become a massive political headache literally overnight.
All right, so let's get right into it. This is a story that has both of the UK's major political parties in a real bind. And the craziest part is how it all completely unraveled in just a matter of hours. So what on earth happened?
So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the firestorm itself. Then we'll dive into who Alaa Abdel Fattah was supposed to be. After that, the shocking tweets that changed everything, how this became a huge cross-party mess, the really tricky deportation dilemma, and finally, what this all means now. Okay, first things first, let's walk through the sequence of events. Because to really get a grip on the chaos here, you've got to see just how fast this whole story completely flipped on its head. So check this out. It all starts in 2021. The Conservatives are in power, and they grant him UK citizenship. A year later, the Prime Minister himself is out there campaigning for his release from an Egyptian prison. Then, just last weekend, he arrives in Britain and gets a hero's welcome from the Labour leader, Keir Starmer. Everything seems great, right? Wrong. Almost immediately, these old social media posts start surfacing, and boom, the whole thing just explodes. So for the absolute shock of what happened next to make sense, you really have to understand the image that was built up around this man. I mean, who exactly was Alaa Abdel Fattah supposed to be?
Well, this wasn't just some vague idea. This framing came from the very top, from the Prime Minister. The story we were all told was that he was a political prisoner, a British citizen whose only crime was essentially exercising free speech online. And that narrative, as you can imagine, kicked off this huge, high-profile international campaign to free him.
Yeah, he was basically painted as this heroic figure from the Arab Spring, a symbol of modern, liberal values, fighting against oppression. And that image, it worked. It brought in support from all over. Celebrities, politicians, they all jumped on board, making his freedom a top priority.
But then, everything changed. And I mean fast. We're talking within hours of him arriving to this celebrated welcome, people online started digging, and they found old posts that painted a very, very different picture. And when I say different, I mean shocking. The content was, frankly, deeply disturbing. We're talking about posts calling for violence against Jews and the police. He called Brits dogs and monkeys, and expressed this intense hatred for white people. One tweet was even described by an analyst as calling for the genocide of white people, for industrial-scale killing. This wasn't just some angry, edgy commentary. It was a clear pattern of violent language that was just sitting there, out in the open the whole time.
Now, for his part, Fattah did issue an apology. He called the tweets expressions of a young man's anger and frustration. The thing is, people immediately pointed out he wasn't exactly a kid when he wrote all this. We're not talking about a teenager here. He was in his late 20s, maybe even his early 30s.
And this is where the whole thing gets super awkward for the political establishment. Because you see, you can't just point fingers at one party here. The blame, well, it goes all the way around. Both major parties have their hands in this.
As one analyst, Dr. Rakib Ahsan, put it, this is a catastrophic cock-up of epic proportions. And he says it implicates the entire political establishment. I mean, it just raises these huge questions, right? What happened to the vetting process? Did anyone do even a basic background check? And what does it say about the judgment of our leaders?
And this really breaks it down perfectly. You look at the Conservatives' role. They're the ones who granted him UK citizenship. It was their Prime Minister campaigning to get him out of Egypt. But then you look at Labour. Keir Starmer called his release a top priority, and they rolled out the welcome mat when he arrived. So as you can see, both parties have their fingerprints all over this.
So, the next logical question you're probably asking is, okay, if this is all so bad, why not just get rid of him? Senior politicians are already calling to revoke his citizenship, so why not just deport him? Well, it turns out it's way more complicated than it sounds.
The UK has basically walked itself into this massive diplomatic trap. I mean, think about it. For years, they've been pressuring Egypt, telling them you have to release this man. And now, they'd have to go back to Egypt, cap in hand, and say, excuse me, remember that guy? Could you maybe take him back? Why on earth would Egypt cooperate? They have zero incentive to help the UK out of this mess they created.
And there are a ton of obstacles here. It's not just diplomatically awkward. Unlike the Shamima Begum case, where she was abroad, Fattah is physically on British soil, which makes the legal side of things way harder. Plus, there's a huge risk that if the UK revokes his citizenship, Egypt will just turn around and revoke their citizenship. That would make him stateless, and you can't deport someone who has nowhere to go. It could turn into what one source called a citizenship stripping war.
So with this whole situation being such a complete and utter mess, what's the official line? And what are the bigger takeaways from this whole disaster?
Well, Downing Street is trying to walk this impossible tightrope. Their official line is basically, we welcome the return of an unfairly detained citizen, but we also find his old tweets abhorrent. As you can imagine, critics are saying this is just totally insufficient and that it completely fails to grasp just how angry people are.
And this brings us to a huge central question. And that question starts with this one number, over 100.
What is that? Well, that's roughly how many other British citizens are currently sitting in jails around the world. So you have to ask yourself, why was Alaa Abdel Fattah's case so special? And the answer seems to be that he just fit a really convenient narrative. He was the heroic pro-democracy activist. He was a cause, a symbol, and that made his case politically valuable in a way that, apparently, the cases of those 100-plus other Brits just aren't.
And that's really what this all boils down to. It leaves us with a pretty critical question, doesn't it? This isn't just about one man or his awful, offensive tweets. It's about something much bigger. It's about the judgment, the vetting processes, and the priorities of an entire political class that got this so catastrophically wrong.